Right, it's 12:32, so let's get started. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the session. In fact, welcome to the first of our Power of Inclusion webinars of 2025. Obviously, the theme of this one is the power of storytelling and how that relates to social mobility. I am joined, who I'll introduce in a second or two, by a great panelist, set of panelists this afternoon. Lots of wisdom which will be shared, which will be great. Introduction. So my name is Dan Robertson. I'm the Global Managing Director of an organization called Fairer Consulting. Fairer, we're based in the UK, but we operate globally, and we are strategic advisors on culture and inclusion management to lots and lots of different organizations across the globe. I am also privileged to be the chair of the Power of Inclusion, and I've done that for a number of years. For those that may not be aware of the programme, particularly, we do have a number of really quite fundamental aims, actually, and you can see them on the screen. But our mission is to provide opportunity to all individuals from different and diverse socioeconomic backgrounds to enter the world of work, to be developed and nurtured without bias, and to progress in their careers. Our mission is fundamentally connected to the principles of intersectionality. For those that are interested in the economics and data, you will know that there's a correlation in the UK between social background and race. And so that is front and centre of our ambition to challenge that intersectional bias and to promote awareness on that. Lots and lots of campaigns. You will see on the screen the QR code. So possibly your one task as participants today might be to take a screenshot or download that QR code. We have a hub as part of the social mobility campaign. There's lots of great resources on the hub, lots of guides and how-to toolkits and things like that. It's a series of webinars and also in-person events that we run throughout the year. On the webinar, you will see all of those, and you can provide an opportunity to register and attend and the rest of it. So please do have a look at those. Just in terms of some practicalities and housekeeping, the session is being recorded. That's so we can distribute the session out afterwards, and we can put the video onto the hub. So you don't need to take too many notes. It will be recorded. You are all automatically muted. That's just so we don't all overtalk each other and things like that. We would love to hear from you. So there's a great opportunity once we've heard some of our great speakers for you to ask questions to Gavin, Chris and Freya. So please use the Q&A function if you've got any questions. If you would like just to make any comments, or if you would like to say hi, it would be wonderful to see where you're all from this morning. So please use the chat just to say good afternoon, rather, not this morning. So good afternoon and where you're from and the rest of it. That would be really great. So on that note, I would now like to introduce our panelists. So first of all, we have Gavin Holland. Gavin, good afternoon.
Afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great, Gavin. Gavin, just and we can do a bit more as we go through, but perhaps just two words in terms of where you're from and your particular interest in this topic.
Yeah, sure. I won't do too much background because it'll ruin the video that comes later. But now, in terms of what I'm doing now, I'm building a new venture capital fund, having spent the previous 11 years building a global fintech fund that we grew to just over $1 billion of assets under management. But yeah, lovely to meet you all, and thank you for inviting me.
Thanks, Gavin. Freya?
Thanks, Dan. Hi, everyone. So I am Freya, head of research at a consultancy called Arcadia Consulting. And in a moment, I'll tell you a lot more about what we do and why it's relevant in the realms of inclusion. So more in a moment.
Amazing. Thanks, Freya. All looking forward to that. And finally, Chris.
I am Chris. I work for a city law firm called Trowell Smith, and I've just had flashbacks of when somebody asked me this question before, and I said, I'm Chris Edwards, like James Bond, like the worst James Bond in the world. But no, I'm Chris, and I work for a city law firm called Trowell Smith. And I have the worst cold, so if 10% of what I say makes sense, I'll be happy.
Well, Chris, I don't know if it's if the announcement of the next James Bond has been formally released. So who knows? We could be seeing the next James Bond on the screen. Time will tell.
I think
Excited
Freya
for
has
that.
more chance than I do.
Okay, fair enough. Right. Well, look. First of all, thank you to all of you because time is precious, and we all really appreciate you all giving your time this afternoon and the rest of it. So that's really appreciated. But we're going to go back to Freya because Freya's going to share with us all of the great work that they're doing and how the power of storytelling is powerful and how it can be used in terms of learning the rest of it. So Freya, over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Dan. So yeah, as Dan says, I'm going to speak to you for about 7 to 10 minutes. So hopefully it's engaging and bear with me during that time before we move to the rest of today's session. So much of what we do in the corporate world and indeed life is share information. Even when presented clearly, data, facts, and figures often fail to stick. And yet we remember with vivid clarity stories from our childhood and those told to us in books and films such as James Bond. Why is that? Some of you may know the answer or perhaps know to some degree why stories are so impactful, but you may never have dived that deeply into the neuroscience behind story. As mentioned, my name is Freya and I'm the head of research at Arcadia Consulting. And at Arcadia, we utilize psychology, neuroscience, and anthropology to design solutions that shift mindsets, behaviors, and in turn, cultures within our client organizations. And owing to the complexity of the human brain, it's a really big feat to try to shift mindsets and behaviors of individuals, let alone teams and organizations. And one of the most powerful tools we use is storytelling. So today I have the pleasure of talking to you about just that, the power of story. And I'm going to answer 3 questions in doing so. Number 1, why are stories so memorable? Number 2, and perhaps most importantly for this audience, what can stories do for inclusion? And number 3, why do stories evoke action? Now, before we dive into why stories are so memorable, I'd like to do a quick exercise to test how memory works in real time. So in a moment, I'm going to share a slide of words with you, and I'd like you to try to memorize as many as possible. You don't need anything on you, no paper or pen or anything like that at the moment. I just want you to focus, look at the screen, and as I say, you'll have 30 seconds to memorize as many of the words as possible. Hopefully simple. Imogen, I'm ready. Let's go. Okay, 30 seconds. Really good. 20 seconds left. I should say this isn't a competition. No one will know your answers, but try and remember as many as you can. 10 seconds left. Give you a couple of extra seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Imogen, please remove the slide. So now you do need pen, paper, your laptop, your phone, whatever you've got in front of you to write down as many of those words as you can remember. I'll give you a quick moment here. And don't worry, by the way, if you can hardly remember any. I ran this exercise internally, and it's surprising how many you forget. So as many as you can, just jot them down there. If you're still going, continue, but I will just move on whilst you're doing so. So we will revisit your results shortly, so keep them to hand. But first, I will talk to why some things stick more than others. The answer, and as I say, some of you may know this in terms of the power of story, is our emotions. So research shows that emotions significantly influence how information is processed and recalled. Countless brain imaging studies have shown that emotionally charged stimuli are remembered more vividly than neutral ones. And this is due to the way that they activate the amygdala. I'm going to bravely illustrate this with an example. Right now, my older sister, who has severe learning difficulties, is in hospital. How does that make you feel? Sad? Shocked that I revealed such information? Relatable, perhaps, for some of you? If so, your amygdala is paying attention. The amygdala helps process emotions and it signals what's important for survival. If something triggers a strong emotion, your brain decides this matters. I need to remember it. Now, this is known as the emotion memory effect. Our brains, due to their fundamental job at keeping us alive, prioritize remembering emotionally charged events over neutral ones. Now, if you take a look at your list of remembered words, how many of those words that you remembered are emotionally charged? How many of them are salient? If research is right, then most of you will have recalled more of the salient emotionally charged words, perhaps such as murder, than the more neutral ones. And that's the power of emotion in memory. So secondly, what can stories do for inclusion? Now, as I'm sure all of you are aware, many organizations typically focus on policies or training to drive inclusion. And no matter how good a policy or procedure may be, for change to really be enacted, humans need to be moved to take action. Now, I won't waste time by going through the definition of inclusivity, but I think it's perhaps helpful to outline that at its core, inclusivity is about how people feel in a particular environment. Now, we know, as I just described, that stories evoke feeling. They activate our emotions. And they do this beyond just an individual brain in isolation. As we all know and have no doubt experienced, stories are passed down from generation to generation. Storytelling is embedded in the way that we as humans make sense of the world and then share that sense and understanding with others. Stories are inherently human. Now, one reason for why this may be so is that when individuals listen to or engage with a story, the brain of the storyteller and the audience literally synchronize. So the neurons in our brain fire in the same patterns as those of the speakers. And this process is known as neural coupling. It means that literally our brains are as one. We're thinking in sync with one another. And what this does is it creates a shared experience, typically at a shared emotional one, hence leading into the memorability point. But it crucially enhances both our understanding and empathy of one another. It creates that relatability point, which is so powerful. And further confirmation of this is that there's sort of, again, countless evidence that has shown that during the process of storytelling, a hormone, which many of you may know, that's associated with empathy and trust, called oxytocin, is also released during the process of storytelling. So this emotional connection helps build a bond between the storyteller and the audience, meaning that the message that's being delivered is that much more impactful and persuasive, ultimately aligning individuals around a central message. So before I move to my third and final piece, I should just quickly recap. Number one, stories evoke emotion, and emotion increases the brain's capacity to remember. They're therefore really powerful tools from the perspective of memorability. Number two, stories are powerful tools for inclusivity through their ability to create a shared experience, boosting both empathy and connection. So finally, let's consider the tangible impact of stories in terms of how they evoke action. Research shows that when we are immersed in a story, it is not only the language and emotional systems in our brain that light up, but it's also our sensory and motor cortexes. Now, this is really interesting because what it means is that the exact same parts of our brains that would be active during, for example, a run, will be active when listening to a story about someone running. From the perspective of our brain, it's essentially the same thing. Now, this phenomenon is commonly referred to as embodied cognition, and it ultimately means that we connect to the message being delivered on a much deeper level than if it weren't delivered in story formats. And it means that we are in effect transported. We feel so part of the story, and therefore we're that much more likely to act upon its message. So I will just conclude before, as I say, we move on to the rest of the webinar. I've shared there, admittedly very quickly, and I apologize for that. I've shared why stories are so memorable. They evoke emotion. Now, this isn't just wishy-washy, stories are emotive. They literally engage our brain's survival armory, our amygdala, and therefore our brain prioritizes memorizing those stories. They're powerful tools for inclusion. They create a shared experience. Neurocoupling and then the release of oxytocin means that the storyteller and the audience have this increased empathy and connection. And finally, they evoke action. Through embodied cognition, stories transport us in a way that allows us to connect to the story on a much deeper level and therefore act upon the message. So thanks for listening. As I say, if you'd like to find out more about what we do at Arcadia, please do get in touch. Would love also to speak to you all on LinkedIn. So also reach out there if that's preferable. Otherwise, follow the QR code. So thank you. I think back to you, Dan.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Freya. I've got so many questions for you about neuroscience and mirror neurons and stuff like that. I won't ask those now. You'll be pleased to know. But no, really, really fascinating, and just the whole power of, stories and how they invoke that emotion, which I think, to your point, really does lead to action, which is great. So we'll explore some of that stuff as we go into the panel. But following on from storytelling, we have produced our own stories at Power of Inclusion. And so we'll start now by sharing a video of that, and then we will go from there.
When I first moved into the city, it felt like an orchestra, and I hadn't played the music before. Everything was really confusing.
First, I think it was a gap in knowledge, and a gap in opportunity, a gap in contacts.
I remember just sitting there thinking, I just have no idea what I'm doing.
My name is Michael Barrington-Hibbert. I'm the managing partner of Barrington-Hibbert Associates. I grew up in a council estate. The first person that gave me a chance was when I was 21 years of age, where I showed up to university with literally about £115 in my pocket to last me through the whole academic year, and was given a place to stay by a gentleman called Roland Smith, who's no longer with us, but he's a godfather to my children. And he invested in me. He gave me a chance. And one of the things that he said to me was, look, I'm investing in you so you can actually do that tenfold with other people. And that always stayed with me.
It was quite overwhelming. I'm a Muslim female of ethnic minority from a state school background. I remember walking in and thinking, like, is this all one firm? I was convinced that there were like multiple firms in this building, seeing like the big conference rooms, seeing everyone coming in with their suits on the first day, trying to like fit into my shoes. Quite literally, to see people who looked so polished and so experienced and sort of trying to fit into that environment which I'd never been in before.
I grew up in a very small town that very few people have ever heard of, called Hereford. A regular person that grew up in a small house in a small town with no family that ever left or moved to the city. I just remember it being very alien and very daunting because, bearing in mind I hadn't done any internships, no work experience, the only work that I'd ever done and been paid for was to work at McDonald's. That's very different to sitting in an office at a desk with some colleagues.
I sacrificed an awful lot of social and cultural capital to get away. So what I mean by that is, because I was so hungry to succeed, to deliver, I was the first one in the office, the last to leave. And what I neglected was that ability to grow from a social and cultural perspective. So I actually started to fall behind my peers simply because I wasn't necessarily sharing who I was.
They were holding a kind of Ashurst Muslim Network Ramadan event, and I didn't kind of expect that to be a thing at a commercial law firm, but because the host was actually unavailable on the day, I had to co-host the event in my first week. That was the first time where I saw other Muslim women in the corporate environment, and also very senior females in the corporate environment. So it was very inspiring, and that was the first time I felt like we could share our lived experiences. It really fostered belonging and inclusion in the firm.
Because of the background that I came from, I have never had that natural network where I could call Joe Bloggs, who happened to go to the prestigious private school. Everybody I've had to get to know has been me working to figure that out. And so the only sort of advice I could give to people and how I've approached it is, number one, just accept that it's a thing. Accept that you have got gaps, accept that there are things that other people have been given that you don't have, and then figure out ways to fix it and find ways of building authentic relationships with people that are trustworthy, that are based on delivery of really valuable things, and just do the work.
I think the notion of social mobility is super important. It helps bridge the gap between being from a background which is not represented in the city, spreading awareness, spreading knowledge, and spreading opportunity to get people from those backgrounds to places that other people are gifted so naturally.
I'm convinced this is not 100% true, sadly, but I believe it's largely true that good will prevail, good work will be rewarded, and you'll rise based on your brilliance rather than where you happen to grow up or which school you went to.
My background's slightly different, and it's only been in the last 10-15 years that I've been able to lean into that superpower, that difference as it were. I wasn't being authentic. I wasn't talking about where I'm from simply because I was embarrassed. But the reason why you get me onto interviews like this is that I'm proud of who I am. It's not about where you start, it's ultimately about where you finish and who you can actually bring along with you on that journey.
All right, lots of quite powerful stories there, actually. And, Gavin, you obviously shared your story, and thank you for that, actually. I have a very similar background myself, but we won't go into that now. Gavin, let's start with you. You shared your story, and you might have taken some self-reflection, I imagine, as you sort of went through that process. Just sort of describe that to us, and why did you feel you wanted to share your story, and what was the kind of process you went through?
Yeah, sure. So I think what drove me to want to do it is when I think back to various moments, whether that was at school, at university, or early part of career, there were various moments of intervention, which might have just been a short sentence or somebody taking me to one side and suggesting I do something or think about something different. And those moments were moments for me that led me down a series of decisions and paths that led me to where I am. And so, and like I say, some of them were literally a word, a comment, a sentence that someone said that they probably don't even know had an impact on me and how I think now and decisions that I made. But I recognize that, and I fully appreciate all of those interventions, and therefore, for me, it was just about wanting to be open, wanting to tell the story of where I started and where I am, and just hoping that something along the way might be remembered. And I've sort of increasingly encouraged. Before I did the video, I'd been on a panel with Lord Mayor's Appeal, maybe 12 months before that, and I'd shared on that panel about the fact I'd worked, funded my way through university by working 100-hour weeks at McDonald's. And then I was at a different event 6 months later with the Lord Mayor's Appeal, and I heard some feedback from a young professional, I think probably somewhere in the 18 to 21 range. And she was giving feedback on things that she'd experienced before with the Lord Mayor's Appeal. And she said, and it's great, I watched the panel and there was this guy there that used to flip burgers and he's now this. And so I was encouraged that at least one person had heard something, and so I thought if I did the video, yeah, maybe one or two more might hear something that's useful. So it's really enjoyable. I thoroughly
Yeah,
enjoyed
no,
it.
thank you. It's amazing. And we'll come on to this, I'm sure, when we go through more questions. But the thing about social mobility is, in some ways, it's quite invisible. And if you don't mind me slightly stereotyping, Gavin, for a second, it's impossible to tell where you come from, or people may even assume the opposite, right? Being white and male and a nice social accent and stuff like that. So the biases we have, it's great you're dispelling some of those. So I'm sure we'll come on to that conversation. Chris, you've been doing some great work, obviously, at Travis Smith, and I know that you've actually produced a kind of a booklet to talk about social mobility and the rest of it. So can you tell us a bit about what you're doing and what this booklet is?
I can, but before I do that, can I share a bit about me? Because that helps shape why we do the things that we do. So I'm from Wales, you can probably tell from my accent. And um, I'm not from a well-off background, and I didn't realize that until I moved to London. When people were talking about the vacations that they took, that the different experiences that they had, for me, privilege was quite relative. For me, in my hometown, I was fine. But coming to a place like the city, understanding what makes careers accessible to people who are from less privileged backgrounds, that has been a huge priority for me and the firm. And what I will share is to do with not only social mobility, but what we do in terms of storytelling across other strands as well. So I'm a gay man, and I'm from a, I guess, lower economic class, however you want to define that. And the most important thing we can do is to share our stories. And it's really hard to do that because when you're from those sort of backgrounds, you feel as though you have to hold back because I don't want to be known as being the gay one. I don't want to be known as being the black one. I don't want to be known as being the poor lawyer who made it against all odds. So it's the storytelling piece is really important to bridge that gap between what people feel as though they should be and what they could be. And for me, that's I mean, it's been wonderful to be in Travis Smith, which has enabled us to create this series of storytelling programs. And I think we'll be sharing those booklets with you after this call. But it may mean for me personally, but I know for other people here, it's imperative that we have these stories.
Thanks, Chris. So in terms of the booklet, just give us a sense of like what is the purpose of it? Who's it aimed at, and what is it designed to do?
It goes back to Freya's evidence that when we have people talking about who they are, talking about their lived experiences, and I'm from a corporate law firm. It's the most cynical place you can ever work. Storytelling, oh, really? What are we doing? What are we talking about that for? But the business benefit around getting people to understand each other, understanding their clients better, getting people to feel more productive and authentic at work, this is exactly what we want to do. And when it comes to social mobility, it's really hard for people to do that. How do you give people platforms to share
Mhm.
where they're actually from? Because it's normally lost in other characteristics or other sort of D&I initiatives.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So it's the complexity of that. Okay. Great. Um, Freya, I'm a complete advocate of storytelling. I think to your point earlier, I mean, the emotions we get from it, but how that leads to action, which is important. And I get a question all the time, which I'm now going to pose to you, which is, the work that I do with globals in a slightly different context is, Dan, how do we measure the success of these interventions and stuff like that? And I think it's a legitimate question, actually, in terms of how do we measure, the impact of what we're trying to do in terms of creating inclusive culture. So in terms of storytelling in particular and the work that you do, I don't know if you've done any thinking around that or any research around that, or how would you measure that sort of success? What sort of indicators would we be looking for from the work with your clients?
It's a great question, Dan. I'm going to do the thing that I would always do as a researcher, which is be fairly theoretical, and then we can move to some examples. But it's the age-old question, right, across the whole of kind of L&D and kind of the workplace when it comes to initiatives, is how do you actually measure the success of any initiative, whether it's storytelling or otherwise? There's three things. The first is, what are you trying to achieve? So you mentioned there like workplace culture, it might be inclusivity, but it's very important up front to be really, really clear about what any initiative is trying to achieve and move the dial on. The second thing is then, well, where is that variable now and where do we want it to be? What does kind of success look like? And then the third thing is, how do we isolate the impact of that particular initiative? So if something has changed, how do we know it was definitely the storytelling campaign that made the difference? So with the specific example there of kind of workplace culture, what do we mean by that? Is it how people feel? And if so, which people, managers, leaders, everyone? Is it how people are working together, how they're communicating? Is it that people feel psychologically safe, and so on and so forth? So up front, it's really being specific about what we're trying to improve. And then, as I say, it's a measurement thing of kind of before and after. Notoriously difficult. One of the most obvious and most well-known methods is surveying people, really listening to people's perspectives and being really clever with the questions you're asking, making sure you're getting some numerical data as well as some more rich qualitative insights. And then in terms of kind of isolating, well, yes, people now feel more psychologically safe or more inclusive or whatever it was, but was it because of that storytelling campaign? Well, if nothing else happened in that time, it's relatively easy to attribute success to the storytelling campaign. But if the picture is a bit more foggy, again, the survey questions, you can be very specific. You know, you can say, to what extent did the storytelling campaign improve your feeling of psychological safety? And maybe tell me a bit more about that. Otherwise, and this is perhaps the most laborious method of doing it, you can run a controlled experiment, you know, with one group of individuals. You can communicate whatever the message is via traditional means, maybe an email, some comms that aren't in story form, and then give the exact same message to another group in story format, and then do that pre and post comparison. So pretty academic, but hopefully a helpful kind of framework for how you'd measure a success of a storytelling campaign.
Yeah, no, that's really useful because you can measure, and I you know, as a sort of someone who studied social psychology, I know that you can measure things and you can have those indicators, and particularly around driving behavior. And also you can measure levels of, okay, well, has your empathy towards a particular group changed, and therefore has your behavior changed and stuff like that, and all of that sort of thing. So great. Well, we can maybe explore more of that as we go through, because I think the impact point is quite an important one, actually. Gavin, back to you for a second. I mean, I think we've talked a bit about your motivation for doing the video and the impact of it. I mean, a couple of things, I guess, to tease out from, and I've seen your story many times and we've spoken many times, but a reminder when I just watched the video just now, Gavin, was that the kind of invisible nature of like who we are and where we come from, and also then how that plays into this idea of sometimes the need to hide and then the need to be authentic. And, you know, I've just, in terms of a story, I've experienced it myself. I come from, just for the wider audience, a council estate in Nottingham, and I've done incredibly well in life. And I have to confess, you know, when I first came to the city of London, I was so out of my comfort zone. I didn't know the subtle codes, and there was definitely a thought process and a behavioral process of, I need to probably be slightly embarrassed, might be the word, from where I came from. And now I'm older and grayer and more confident. Don't really care about that. And actually, I'm really proud, actually, in a way. I'm so proud of where I came from. But I want to get your thoughts then, Gavin, on how do you navigate this desire to be really authentic. And you also talked about the networking thing and utilizing the network to elevate you up and, move you in your career and the rest of it. So a couple of thought questions in there, really.
Yeah, I'll do my best. So, well, firstly on the invisible point. So the observant among us would have noticed that my title here is a different company to the one in the video. So I changed jobs 4 months ago, building a new fund. And I went to lunch with my assistant. I think it was, call it 2 months ago. And we're having lunch, and probably because I can't stop telling stories, I was talking about McDonald's and blah, 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 funding my university. And my assistant just stopped, and she was completely aghast at the whole thing. She's like, oh, hold on a second. What are you talking about? And she's like, oh, just tell me, where did you come from? What did you do? Blah, 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 blah. And I explained everything. She said, my God, I had no idea. I thought you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth. And then I could see her just relaxing, just the whole body language just changed. And it was her feeling more comfortable that she was talking to somebody that actually was not much different to her. Maybe it had different paths, different opportunities, but actually fundamentally lived some similar experiences. And I think for me, it was a nice reminder that if you don't tell the story, or if you don't drop breadcrumbs of stories and people pick them up, then why would anybody know? Because they just see the version of you that they happen to see in that moment. And then I think related to one of your other questions, and I've mentioned earlier the sort of interventions that I had and moments in my life that had these bits of help. And one of them was a boss that I had maybe 15 years ago who had said to me, you're doing great, but you're overcompensating for what you believe is a problem, which is you're overcompensating because you think you're more junior than you think you should be presenting. You're trying to be more serious. You're trying to be more professional because you want people to believe that you're older and more senior and more accomplished. And she said, I completely understand why you're doing that. And I'm not going to tell you to stop doing that. But she said, give people something about you to remember, because they won't remember that you're old. They won't remember that you're professional. They won't remember any of that because you'll just be the same as everybody else. Make sure when you're networking, because you asked a question around networking, make sure that you're authentic in all of those discussions. And it doesn't mean that you have to blurt out everything about your past that was difficult every time you meet somebody, but give them something to remember, give them a reason to remember you, and being authentic and being yourself and just sharing. Yeah, that is that authenticity that then you'll be remembered, and that networking will build more solid relationships. So
Gavin,
I hope I've answered some of your questions, but I'm sure I've missed something. But
yeah, no, great. And I think to Freya's point earlier, I think human stories impact actually. Chris, I'll come to you in a second, but just for everybody online, we are going to open up the Q&A. So if any of you do have any questions for any of the panelists, get your questions in now, and I'll come back to those in a second. But Chris, go ahead.
I was going to say, Gavin, I fully appreciate and understand the journey that you had in terms of sharing who you are. As I said, I'm from, you can tell from my accent, from Wales, a pretty poor part from West Wales, and for me, coming to a place like the City of London was alien. When I would tell people I'd be going to the city, they'd think Swansea or Cardiff. And that's the environment that I was from. And in terms of my accent, in terms of how I dress, in terms of how I presented myself, it's unless you're familiar with that sort of space, that is a big handicap. And going to the point around storytelling and role modeling, if you don't have people who show what you could be, or people where you think, oh, I can relate to you, maybe not everything, but elements, then that makes that path so much harder, which is why I'm unbelievably passionate about talking about social mobility because, as we've said, it is an invisible characteristic. So when we have more people talk about, actually, this is where I came from. This is what it was like. It's not the same as you. That doesn't mean it's bad or good, but it's different. And storytelling can help bridge that gap.
We often say that perception is reality. And actually, Gavin, if you hadn't shared those stories, then
Yeah.
for your assistant and for others working with you, the reality was that Gavin was born with a silver spoon because they know no different. The reality in their brain
Yeah.
is that that's the case. So until you give them that information, they will treat you and consider you as such. So it's kind of on us. It's on all of us to kind of share our story.
Well, Freya, I was going to thank you for leading to where I wanted to go because I was going to ask you a question around that, which is really fascinating. And I have to confess I've changed my tune on this over the years. I think previously, and I'm a leader, I manage a whole bunch of people. I've never aspired to be a leader. I just happen to be one because I guess I'm competent. I've never thought that, or I've always questioned why should the burden be on me? Like, why do I have to tell my story? You know, as somebody from a council estate, also as a gay man, is not, I don't have the power, so etc. etc. I think I've changed my perspective because I think to Gavin's point, I think people stereotype me all the time, and what I've learned, I suppose, from my leadership journey is the more that I share, it gives confidence for others to share. So it does the practical thing of breaking down the barriers, but then it gives other people the license to share their stories as well. And that's where we really lean into that
Dan,
inclusive
can,
work environment and the
Dan, can
rest.
I add to that? I
Yes.
fully agree with everything that you said. And I think for people on this call, the realization that you are a role model, whether you like it or not.
Right.
If you're in a senior position, you will have more of a role model, I suppose, responsibility. So what kind of person do you want to be known as? Do you want to be known as the one who's kind, empathetic, open, or do you want to be known as something more negative? But that responsibility, like it or not, is there. You
Mm.
are a role model to others. And I know for some people that's difficult to accept. But Dan, what you said earlier resonates very much with me. It's hard.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Yeah. No, no, I think that's right. We have a shadow whether we like it or not. So we
Yeah.
have to determine what we do with it. We're going to go into the panel of the questions. We've got a few coming in now, which I can see. But Freya, very briefly then, before we go into the other ones, that point on the importance of senior leaders sharing their story and, to Chris's point, role modeling and the rest of it.
Yeah. I think I'll quickly say two things on that. I think it's important for the leader and it's important for those that are listening. So for the leader, it demonstrates authenticity. It enables trust. It kind of, by sharing your story, particularly when it's a story of vulnerability, that automatically boosts trust that your team will have for you. And there's countless leadership studies that evidence that trust is basically number one when it comes to being an effective leader. So sharing your story is, if you're answering the question of why, it's really important to be an effective leader. But then the second thing for those listening to the story, I mean, you've all sort of mentioned it. Stories can break stereotypes and biases. They can help reduce imposter syndrome. It's all about the listener to the story going, oh, well, that leader, they've experienced struggles and maybe they're the same struggles, or maybe those struggles, they weren't the same in the specifics. You weren't necessarily from the exact same background, but you both have experienced some kind of struggle or some kind of emotional pain, such that there's that relatability piece that I spoke about. So breaking stereotypes and biases, reducing imposter syndrome, boosting that kind of trust and relatability piece, and everything I shared at the beginning, right? If you want to deliver a message, we might not just be talking about your sort of vulnerability, authenticity stories. It might just be you as a leader really want to get an important message across. Well, if you do it with a story, it's going to be remembered more, people are going to align around it more, and people are more likely to take action on your message. So
Great, amazing.
hopefully that
Thank you.
answers. Nice.
Right, we have lots of questions in the chat, which is code for me saying, please keep your responses brief. Gavin, there's a particular question for you, which I'll coming up first, actually. So first of all, people are saying, thank you so much for sharing your story, all of you. And that's all great. A quick question for you, Gavin, around if it was reversed. So if somebody who was junior and shared their story to somebody much more senior, in terms of your experience in the sector that you're in, leaders, where do leaders still need to grow? Or I think the question's around, how open are senior leaders to hearing those different stories, and what kind of stereotypes still hang around, if you like? So how would that power have played out differently, do you think?
Yeah, a good question. So I think in a way, the question proves the value in the video, this discussion, the webinar, the whole initiative, which is essentially what we're saying is, if the people that are receptive to those discussions the other way around, as the question has asked, if those people can make themselves more visible and more approachable, then more and more of those discussions can happen. And I think it's an inevitability that not everyone will care, not everyone will want to hear, not everyone will be a great listener, and some of them might even have negative reactions. But I think it's imperative of all of us that are in that first category of people that do want to become more visibly from a different background, that would be more receptive to these types of stories from all colleagues or all industry participants or students or anyone we bump into. The more we can be visible, the easier it is for them to feel safe to have those discussions, I think, which is why all of this is important.
Yeah. Freya, question for you. When we think about storytelling, I fundamentally understand the power of it. I think other people might see it as a bit soft and fluffy and that not hard science type thing. So it's like, how do you, like, if you're starting a new project with a client, or kicking off a new campaign, how do you get people involved and get some emotion going from the beginning, so that this is a great methodology to use and all of that?
Well, for those that are particularly skeptical, perhaps those who have a brain that works far more in the kind of rational, logical space than emotional, I probably wouldn't start with why stories evoke emotion and in turn memory. I'd probably start with the power of storytelling in relaying information and facts and figures and data, and how actually you can take really robust, scientific, data-driven pieces of information, and if you weave a sort of narrative around them, in what we call data-driven storytelling, your message will have that much more impact. So I think I sort of would tailor to the audience accordingly. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, great. No, I think it is, because if you've got more of that rational brain, then you can still do the storytelling, but more from data.
Can I add to
actually,
that? And
yeah,
this
go
may
ahead,
be
Chris.
semi-controversial, but when we, of course, the data is important. I work for a law firm. They will follow the data. But in terms of what will make people follow, what will make people buy into the power of authenticity, of storytelling, you need to engage with, I hate this word, the popular kids. So if there is somebody at the firm who is considered, right, they will bring people along with them, they are the influencers, their voice is heard more than others, engage with them. They will really help you to drive this forward.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for identifying key stakeholders, and we definitely talk to our clients about this at the beginning of any sort of new campaign. You use the word popular. We'll often use the word sort of catalyst, like who in your organization, regardless of seniority, has real influence. And as you say, Chris, if you can get those people engaged in whatever initiative, or you can get those people to share their stories,
sorry, Fran, I'm being lowbrow.
Well, I think the point is valid, and I think actually on the principle of storytelling, here's a quick story. Many, many, many years ago, we did quite a significant project with London Underground. And this was a long time ago. This was when it was very, very male centric. And if any of you go to the Underground, every single station has its own secret doorway where you go in, and that they've got mini control towers and things like that at every single station. And you'd walk in, and it would be this male environment, and you'd literally have what we would definitely nowadays consider inappropriate imagery of females and things like that on the wall. And you can imagine all of that, right? And the leaders of the Underground were very, very keen to change that. And there was lots and lots of resistance to it and stuff like that. Now, the one thing that the Underground takes extremely seriously is health and safety. That's the one thing that they would never compromise on. We went to the head of health and safety, and excuse the stereotype again, he was this guy called Mike, and he was a big guy, Cockney, Londoner, and all of that. But he had high levels of credibility amongst his teams. And we said to Mike, we need you to lean in to what we're doing around this inclusion campaign. And he said yes. And it was transformative because everyone was like, well, if Mike's getting involved in this, it must be
I
important,
love
etc.
that. I love that.
And look, on the surface, he would be the last guy you would think that would be
But
involved in this
that's what
sort of
makes it more
campaign.
effective.
It was really effective, and it added so much credibility. So the point about alliances and all that is great. Right, super conscious of time, and I want to try and get through a couple of more questions if I can. Chris, you do lots of stuff around this, and also now I'm conscious it's LGBTQ plus History Month, and I'm sure you're doing some stuff at work on that. How do you create safe spaces for colleagues who might not be
Yeah, we
comfortable with
were
these sorts
we
of
were talking about it
conversations, right?
before. This is a really hard one because how do you do that? It involves multiple different factors, people, teams. I think it's about identifying people who will support you in doing this. So I've been at Travelsmith for about 9 years now, and our senior leadership is very receptive to this. And if I were to approach them saying, look, we need to have this campaign about having people talk about their backgrounds and experiences relating to social mobility or LGBT or gender or race, they would be quite receptive, but it's taken quite a lot of time to get us there. And I wish I could give you all a roadmap on how you could do that. I think the only thing I could do is identify who are the senior people who might be open to this. But having said that, this is really, there's a potential of things going really badly here. You would say, oh, look, you look poor. Do you want to get involved in our social mobility background? No, don't do that. Don't do that. Oh, you're black. Why don't you get involved in our race equality program? As in, obviously, that's not a good approach, but what is the alternative? I wish I could give you a roadmap on how to achieve that. It's gradual steps. It's creating that space where people can feel safe to do that. But I would say identify individuals who you know would be comfortable in doing that, and then get them to share the stories amongst their peers of senior leaders. Sorry, I know that's a bit of a vague answer, but if
No,
anybody
it's
else
just because
has,
we definitely we don't want to do that. But I think also one of the things that I've learned as well is that stories of difference don't have to be from minority groups. The stories from allies and how they've learned along the way is
that is a
just as powerful
great
as
point,
well.
sorry, which I should have added. Give people who are in the majority an option to share their stories. Great.
Yeah, and so I think that's really useful. Super conscious of time, so I'm going to wrap up this aspect with one final reflection from each of you, and it is the classic one piece of advice or one piece of wisdom which you'd like to share. So, Chris, I'll start with you. So, if there was just one thing that you said to participants, look, it's
Hmm.
hard and it's complicated, etc., but actually, there's one thing which, in your experience, has been effective. What would your one piece of advice be?
I think it's identify your allies, and they can come from unexpected camps.
Great, amazing, good advice. Definitely need allies in the current environment. Thank you, Chris. Freya?
I would say be intentional, whatever the messages you want to deliver or the perception you want people to have of you or of something, be intentional when you craft your message, and utilize the power of story.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. And I do, Freya, think back to the conversation we had earlier about the measurement, like be clear on what we're trying to measure and all of that kind of stuff is fab. Yeah, thank you. Gavin, your one piece of advice?
Yeah, I mean, try and kill two birds with one stone and answer one of the other questions that we didn't get to.
Yes, please do. Please do.
The one about sharing at networking events. So I think the piece of advice, which I think answers the question, is just find your thing that you're happy to share, and that's authentic, that's about you, and just put it out there. So the person that told me that sort of intervention about what I should be doing always used to tell people about her dog. The example she gave me of someone else that we both worked with that did a brilliant job used to dress like Willy Wonka. I mean, find your own thing, whether it's how you dress or what you tell people, but just find your thing that's you and just try it out, and you'll be amazed what success you have with it.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on, actually. Thanks, Gavin. And look, thank you all, because, power of inclusion is fundamentally important for me, and I imagine it is obviously for you because you've given your time. And I do know that time is very precious. So we really appreciate it at the Lord Mayor's Appeal in terms of the time that you've given and the power of inclusion. So thank you so much. Thank you, everyone that's attended. Just a few wrap up points. So you can see that we've got the next program coming up. That's in person. So the next workshop series is the power of mentoring. And you can see the time date there. Please do go to the hub and register, but we will send you additional information. There is lots and lots of great stuff on the hub. So as a reminder, please do go to the hub. There's lots of guides. You can rewatch Gavin's story and lots of other stories there. So please do that. Get in touch with colleagues at Power of Inclusion. Any support and advice, we're more than happy to give out, and the rest of it. We do value your feedback, and we do actually read the feedback. And so any topics or ideas that you would like for future sessions, please let us know. Otherwise, we will either see you at the next virtual session or hopefully in person. But from me, the whole team and the panels, thank you all so much.